Now let's kick off our second session with apexanalytix, and let me introduce our speakers, Karen Coronado and Akhilesh Agarwal. Karen Coronado oversees data governance strategy and execution for Lennox International, a global leader in heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration. Karen leads the Master Data Management Enterprise Functional Team, identifying, managing, and educating on data as an asset. Akhilesh leads the apexanalytix solutions practice, responsible for global technology solutions, including Apex Portal, a 100% touchless solution for global supplier information management and working capital optimization. And with that, I will give the floor to Karen and Akhilesh to get this session started. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, Shannon. This is Akhilesh Agarwal. I want to start with talking about a ranking published by Spend Matters, which is a very well-known industry analyst. They've published the scorecard for supplier relationship management and risk solutions, and it shows a comparison between different tools which are available in the industry. You can see apexanalytix is an outstanding value leader compared to many other solutions available. So why is that? We have been classified as the best in class for supplier and financial information validation capabilities. We have built-in workflow configuration and a rules engine, which can easily be used to create new workflows, modify existing workflows, or create any number of business roles. We are also the top performing solution in risk modeling and monitoring capabilities. apexanalytix is a great fit, even in cases where they have other source to pay or even other supplier management platforms. So that's a big differentiator. We just don't stand out on our own. We are heavily compatible and integrate with many solutions out there. We have pre-built integration capabilities using a secure open adapter platform. We are also SAP certified in terms of integration. So we can integrate out of box with the S/4HANA on the cloud, or SAP ECC6 installs, which have been used traditionally in the ERP world. But we are not just limited to SAP integration. We integrate with any number of ERPs and third-party systems. We have automatic validation capabilities built into the system for hundreds of fields. And we just don't validate based on the formatting of the data, but very soon we'll talk about more of these validations in the session, but we can validate against the actual source, like the IRS tax IDs or the European Union VAT numbers, and so on and so forth. In today's case study, you will hear about other master data domains and solutions and how elegantly they can work together. Having said that, I'm really pleased to be presenting today with Karen Coronado. Karen is the manager for data governance. She oversees the data governance strategy and execution and communication for the company, as well as the SAP master team in her organization. She has been with Lennox for 4 years and leads the MDM enterprise functional team. On her roadmap, it includes customer, supplier, material, finance, and employee master data. She's very well experienced in business relationship management, business process improvement, and program, project, and change management capabilities. Having said that, I'm turning over to Karen, who will walk you through today's presentation.
Thank you, Akhilesh. I'm going to start with a few facts about Lennox. Lennox is a global leader in heating, air conditioning, and in the refrigeration markets. The financial revenue, fiscal revenue for 2020 was $3.63 billion. Lennox has operations in North America and Europe, and it has a business mix of 65% residential, 22% commercial, and 13% refrigeration. Lennox was founded in 1895 in Marshalltown, Iowa. We're currently based, the headquarters is based in Richardson, Texas, which is in the Dallas Metroplex area, but we have multiple factories and facilities all across the country. So I'd like to start with some background on the initiative. So the need for the MDM program was real, and the need to manage data as an asset was even more real. In order to support the program, the data governance group was established following a 2015 business case, and I was brought onto the team in early 2017. Customers, materials, and supplier were all identified within the scope of the initial MDM initiative. The roadmap execution started with the customer and contact domains, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail, and it was going to be followed by material. However, after a 2019 internal global audit, accounts payable audit, numerous process controls weaknesses were identified, and these weaknesses, along with incidents of fraud that had financial impact, further exposed the risk. So therefore, as a result, at the end of 2019, vendor MDM was prioritized ahead of the material MDM domain. I do use vendor and supplier interchangeably. SAP uses the terminology vendor, but the project had decided to use supplier. So you'll hear me refer to both supplier and vendor. So as I said, in our first phase of the MDM initiative, we focused on customer and contact data. We had selected TIBCO EBX, which is a popular platform for data management. With that, we hired a consultant firm to help us scope and build the solution on the TIBCO platform. We involved the external consultants for these reasons, because they had the functional expertise, they brought methodology, and we could hold them accountable for the blueprint process. They were able to focus on the blueprint deliverables without the distractions of other projects. So that was very helpful. It was an involved project, the customer and contact MDM, because everything was built from the ground up. We had no validations pre-built, no data models, no tables, no APIs, no nothing. So nothing was existing. The experience that we gained from the customer and contact project was valuable. But as we started on the second domain, which was the vendor, creating everything custom was a larger undertaking than the current team could rapidly deliver. And remember, we had that audit that we were trying to address as well. So that led us to rethink our approach.
Thanks,
And
Karen.
so, yes, thank you.
And just to elaborate more on what Karen already said, when Lennox decided to use the Apex Portal platform as the solution, she already mentioned using TIBCO as one of the middlewares between how Apex Portal will work and how it will integrate with the SAP system. So what Lennox got was the pre-configured best practices and templates on the workflows they could use right out of box. So continuous improvements are being made in the Apex Portal solution, but Lennox was able to use our out-of-box workflows and get a very good jump start on creating a solution which is configured for them. Apex Portal also is in process of publishing a guidebook, which will also have a certification type to it. And that will include all of our best practices, which every potential customer can use, or even new prospects who are planning to use MDM tools can leverage that best practice book and even get certified on it. Just to give all of you an example of how in-depth our best practices are, if we take a very common fear like the name of the vendor or a supplier, that would exist in pretty much every MDM solution out there or ERP system, because it's a common fear. Right? It's the name of the supplier you're doing business with. But just this field alone has best practices, which can read up to almost 2 pages, 2 full pages of a document, right? And one can argue, like, it's just the name of the vendor. There is no complexity or complexity which should be tied to it. But what Apex has done is we have created our best practices based on hundreds of implementations that we have done in the past with Lennox and other clients of ours. And using all of the lessons learned and the knowledge base, we've gathered the best practices and created a document. So just the name of the vendor is 2 pages long. And think about hundreds of other fields that you would have in your MDM solution and the best practices tied to it. So all of this comes out of box. And what's most important is the data integration is also included using secure open adapters and is part of the solution. So that's what Lennox ended up using, and they were able to easily integrate with their ERP system. So Karen, if you can talk a bit about, what your vendor or selection process was, like how did you evaluate different tools in the market and reach to a conclusion?
Sure. So as I was kind of summarizing up the customer and contact domain, everything was done in-house and it took a lot longer. So when we had that AP audit, we realized we needed to move things a little bit quicker and we needed some assistance. So we, as we started evaluating the existing tool sets that we had on site and analyzing customer and vendor data, we realized that, customer and vendor data, is name and address and some other things that seem to be very consistent, but they're really very different. Some of the data is the same, but the business processes are very different between a customer and a supplier. So the different requirements drove us to consider like a different approach and needing a different set of tools. So the ability to change the process was one factor that we took into consideration, and that kind of seems like a random statement, but when we had the rules or the requirements for customer, one of the requirements was that we could not modify our SAP interface, and we really couldn't modify the processes around it. And so with vendor, we were able to change the business process and make modifications so that it led us to a different set of tools, or the ability to have different set of tools. With customer, it was internal users only, but for suppliers, it's both internal and external users. And then there were multiple sources of customers and contacts, whereas for the supplier, it's a centralized model. So we started looking at alternatives, and we evaluated a couple different things. We evaluated using the same platform we used for customer and contact, which was TIBCO EBX. We looked at a well-known data cloud provider. We looked at a company that offered a solution that was a lot like Ariba. And then we looked at apexanalytix, which we heard about Apex from Gartner, a Gartner article. And just for your information, that article was How to Navigate the Fragmented Supplier Management Solutions Market. It was published on January 29th, 2019. And that was really where we first started hearing about Apex, was through Gartner. So the decision then started coming down to, do we buy versus build? So building, it would have taken extra time using TIBCO EBX and effort, and extra time and effort and money to build out the functionality. The resource involvement to research best practices, to scope out the solution, to meet the functional requirements, and all of that was just a lot of time and effort and money. We would have also had manual data cleansing efforts and data cleanup. Like if we were to have an API to call the tax to validate a tax ID number, we would have had to build it. We didn't have anything already out of box. It would take extra time for IT to implement this highly customized solution. All documentation, procedures, and training would have been needed to be created from scratch. Lennox would have been fully responsible for all integration, for architecture, for workflows. All of that stuff would have been, done from scratch. We would have been primarily supporting the implementation and responsible for all functional enhancements. And finally, there would have been the additional internal support burden that would have come with a custom built application. So things we considered with buying. With Apex, the best practices and the templates were already, pre-built. They had so many templates that were already available. They brought to the table the best practices, and they enabled us to collaborate with their team and other members that already had like best practice knowledge, and that was a big plus. They accelerated data cleansing by using external data sources and data cleansing as a service. We were able to implement with fewer internal resources. We accelerated our time to benefit with this implementation. Integration with other systems and third-party data providers for due diligence and vetting was provided, like I said, like the tax ID for one example. And then value added over time. Software improvements are pushed out to us, and there's a great support team that Apex offers as well. Transition to internal ownership is an option. There's the flexibility to own the configuration and rules. And we wanted a solution that had best practices, templates, and workflows included. We have gone live, and we were able to do so with fewer resources, and we were able to accelerate the time to benefit. So with the buy, our internal team was able to focus on other work streams such as data cleansing, modeling, integration, training, and change management. These are things that can't easily be outsourced. So it was nice that our team was able to focus on, change management and some other things that needed to occur.
Thanks, Karen. And just to, add to what Karen already said, the key was, the out-of-box rule. So just to give everyone an appreciation, Apex portal comes pre-configured with more than 180,000 business rules out of the box. That's huge, because no single company in the world could kind of recreate those rules from scratch when doing a build versus buy analysis, right? So with Apex portal, you not only take advantage of those 180,000 business rules, but then you add on top of it what your own company specific rule sets look like, so that you're focusing on how the solution should work for you versus rebuilding everything from scratch, for which you may not even have the expertise in-house. Give you another example. When the Brexit happened, it happened, we all knew it was going to happen for several years, but the moment the trigger was pulled, the first thing which happened was the UK VAT came out of the European Union, and to validate the UK VAT going forward, we had to connect directly to the UK Customs House database. apexanalytix was able to make this transition very quickly in a matter of a couple of days. And then every client of Apex took advantage of this new UK validation rule, and they did not have to do a thing. Apex made the transition seamless to all of our clients. So that's another advantage of why you would build versus buy, or buy versus build, I should say, where you're not concerned about the changes in the industry from a compliance perspective. As Apex learns about those, we are able to retrofit it into our solution, and you just take advantage of it with a new release. So just wanted to illustrate that factor in this session. So going ahead, in terms of process improvement and standardization, Karen, can you speak a bit about, what benefits you ended up with?
Yeah, so an opportunity we realized with the supplier master, let me try to get that spit out correctly. An opportunity that we saw with the supplier master data management project was pushing or helping our organization adopt some new best practices. And I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but change is tough, and us being able to, Lennox being able to focus on change management and pushing best practices, because we weren't completely focused on development, was a big plus for us. Apex provided best practices and out-of-the-box templates, and these best practices and these templates helped our business make decisions. We had a data governance organization that was set up where we would bring in decisions to a council, and sometimes the council members really, they might have had an opinion but didn't know what best practices were, and we could bring to them the recommendations that Apex had, and that would help with making decisions for the whole, organization. And so that was a big plus. We spent a lot of time on data cleansing. We had 130,000 active vendors when we started this project. And it's taken us about a year. We're down to about 12,000 active vendors. Our policy is anything 18 months or older that hasn't had any kind of transaction, and then we go through the process of flagging it for deletion. And this cleanup has enabled us to load the data into, Apex without loading a bunch of other inactive or, dirty data. Our strategic sourcing team manages 300 contracts for key suppliers, so it's not a huge amount that we have that is that are managed or have contracts. What we have done is we've made it where a supplier can be invited by anyone at a lead level or above. And when they do an invitation, Apex has a way of saying whether or not it's a duplicate. So they'll say, this already looks like it matches this vendor. Do you want to continue? And it allows you a way to exit out of the invitation and possibly use the existing vendor. So that's a big plus. We have so many duplicate vendors that we've had to clean up. So stopping it at the beginning is a big benefit for us. We've introduced a more discipline around duplicate records, as I said, and we're also pushing for preferred suppliers. And by having visibility of suppliers in the portal, more people began using existing suppliers and just asking for a business extension. So I could go in and go, oh, I see Office Depot is there, but wait, my business unit isn't using it, so let me go ahead and extend it to my company. And it's an easy process to go through. Prevents a duplicate record from being created, and it just allows that supplier to be able to be used by your business unit. We have been able to enforce standard payment terms. Oh my gosh, we had like 200 and some odd payment terms. We had net 1, net 2, net 3, net 4. And I'm like, why do we have, are we really going to pay somebody in 3 days instead of, due immediately or whatnot? So we spent quite a bit of time getting those payment terms standardized. And now what we have is we have a rule that the controllers have agreed to that said net 60 is our standard payment term. And if you don't have a contract, then you need a VP approval to have a different payment term. And this has worked really well because the average person who's doing an invite may not even be an accountant or understand what the payment term is. And so we really wanted to remove that decision from their hands. And finally, we pushed more towards using EFT instead of issuing checks. So what we do with that is that the portal allows us to, during an invitation, the person that's doing the invite to the supplier cannot choose that the supplier wants to get paid by check, but the supplier can choose to get paid by check. So they can choose to get paid by check. They have to say why they want to get paid by check, because we're really trying to push everybody towards EFT when possible to reduce the overhead of issuing checks, mailing out checks, checks coming back, and then that whole audit process. So I did receive an interesting stats on April 23rd. Our AP team sent out an email and they said that we've already saved an estimated amount of $2,500 a month of not using checks. And we went live October 1st of 2020. And so, that's a pretty good savings just from, not giving check as an option to inviters and really trying to push as much as we could for EFT. So that's a good thing.
Thanks, Karen. That's a really great data point, and that's just one field in your MDM solution, which is payment.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just love the results that you all get and the process improvements that can be made when MDM is used correctly and implemented correctly, right? With the best technology solutions available at your disposal. And with that, I just want to emphasize, right? So think about implementing MDM solution as a driver of your process improvements, whether it's in P2P, whether it's consolidating vendor records, whether it's payment term rationalization, like the example Karen provided. And what really happens is in a traditional ERP platform, some of the business rules are taken for granted, meaning the ERPs may or may not even be configured with a field requirement or how the formatting of the data or the validation of the data should be. As a process, we are just enforcing it, saying the data keyer is responsible to enter data correctly, fill in the missing pieces of information. And we all know, coming from managing MDM tools, managing data, that our existing data, traditional data or historic data, as we call it, is never great. We have big holes in our vendor master databases or any other type of master data that we manage. So with a true MDM solution and with the help of Apex Portal, what you can really do is harmonize these rules. You can enforce that required fields always get populated. And even with your existing data set, as your suppliers or your internal users are making changes, those missing data elements get populated because now the business rules are configured in the MDM solution. And a lot of them come out of box. Now, with standardization and harmonization of data, you're also contributing to the success of various teams in your department. So, for example, a reporting team, which is creating reports, now they can create a lot better reporting because the data behind the scenes is a lot better. if you have an analytics team creating predictive analytics or algorithms to drive changes in future, the analytics gets better, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the advantages that come out of the improved data structures and data being in the right place at the right time. So that's all part of change management. It's a huge process to undertake, but ultimately you succeed like Karen has done in her organization. So Karen, if you can talk about some of the key questions that you took internally on your decision to buy.
Yes. So just to kind of maybe wrap up or summarize what I've kind of been talking about, when we were making some of the decisions on, what to ask before we bought, we just thought we would share some of those questions with you. One thing that I don't think I have listed here is don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to cleanse your data. I would say that should be like a forefront of the existing data. On any MDM project, it always takes longer and it's always dirtier than what you think it's going to be, or at least that's my experience. So in the absence of a well-defined future state, you have to get, solution providers' best practices. So look for the provider's ability to add value over the existing knowledge that you have in your team. And that Apex was awesome in adding extra value for us. Be completely clear on where your integration points are. Meaning, are you going to have it directly into SAP? Is SAP going to feed back into Apex? What is it? Is there a bus in the middle? What does it look like? Be really clear up at the very beginning. Compare the functionality with the application as is delivered out of box. So this, I wish we could have done it a little bit different. We had said when we went into the project that we were going to implement out of the box functionality, but then we ended up with two really complex enhancements, I guess you should say. And I think if I could go back and do it again, I would say let's stand it up out of the box and then figure out what enhancements are needed instead of putting the enhancements up front. Because for this tool, there's, as Akhilesh said, there are a lot of pre-built workflows. There's a lot of things that are already covered that probably should try to take advantage of. Understand the level of effort you or a consultant needs to put in to get the solution to do what you need it to do. Look for specific best practices and templates that are already included with the solution, because they will give you a head start on what you're doing, and you want to do as much or as little customization as possible. Get a list of the validations performed. Apex has a bunch of different validations that are performed, and then also find out if there are any additional costs with those validations. Make sure that the solution that you pick meets the needs or the wish list of your architect team, and then make sure it can meet the standards that you might already have set. Ask the question about the deployment strategy and how are customizations handled. And then ask about functions that they might provide as data as a cleaning as a service, data cleansing as a service. Determine the ease of use, especially if you're going to have many levels of users. We have from admins to VPs in the system, and so you really want to make sure that it's very user friendly. Ask how the solution provider plans to work with you remotely, and how will you be prioritized, or how will your company be prioritized over other projects that the provider might have. Check references and ask hard questions. And then check to see how flexible they are and how, how open they are to input, like those customizations I was telling you about. How open are they to implementing something like that? And finally, you can't have an effective project without involving stakeholders. So though the process of defining the project and researching solutions, we came up with a vision of the results. We wanted a simplified process and workflows, reduced vendor management time, improved controls, spend reduction. We needed to meet audit compliances and regulatory compliances, and we wanted better data quality as well as reduction in fraud. So as we were implementing, we continued to go back to these visions, these that we wanted to try to achieve to make sure that we are getting there. So I hope that was clear. It was a little random, I think, but there were a lot of things a lot of touch points and a lot of things to consider when you're, looking for a provider.
Thank you, Karen. And at this point, I'll just like to commend Lennox and Karen on the great success they had in the live implementation. They already have experienced an incredible adoption and even cost benefits, as Karen mentioned earlier. So, her leadership and her team's excellent project management, is what led to the success. And from an Apex perspective, it's one of the most well-executed implementation, which has been executed so far. So, and in the end, the go live led to the benefit of both the business needs as well as the technical requirements being met, right? And we were able to bridge the gap between the two and make better connections. So, thank you, Karen, for taking us through your journey. And at this time, over to Shannon for Q&A.
Thank you both so much for this great presentation and for this information. Lots of questions coming in. There's a couple of questions in the chat. If you have a question, feel free to submit it in the Q&A section, but let me dive in here. And Karen, I'll start with you. We get this question a lot, for case studies. When you started the data governance journey, did the data steward role exist already in the company? And just in case the answer is no, how do you deal and how do you convince a company director that the data steward role is needed?
That is a great question. No, it did not exist with customer and contact, and then no, it didn't exist with vendor either. It's a journey. It is challenging because, as with most people, you're asking them to do something else and they're already fully allocated. So with customer and contact, we probably did not have the right people identified. But as we got into vendor, we fine-tuned what we were trying to accomplish, and I ended up having about 50 data stewards. But the data stewards is a term that can be used to describe so many different roles. But the data steward the role that we had defined for a data steward is their responsibility was to take information and bring information back, because we're located in Richardson, but we have offices all over the US, Mexico, and India, and et cetera. And I can't, as a data governance person, reach out to everybody. So we had the data steward's role was to take the communication, go get the answers. Like if we were to send out a list to say these 50 vendors were wanting to flag for deletion, can you let us know? We would always send it out before we actually acted on it. They would be responsible for replying back. And it's a lot of work, but what I did was I tracked it as an action, and I put a goal into their performance plan that they would respond to, 85% of my emails, or they would attend, somebody from their team would attend my meetings. And I would recommend that there would be more than one data steward coming from, let's say, Marshalltown, Iowa, because everybody's got another job. So they have 2 data stewards. One is required to attend the meeting, and there is a goal and objection, a goal on everybody's performance plan. But it is challenging, and it takes a lot of work to get data stewards to be involved. And I also send out communication, and I send out the communication to the data steward managers as well. I was shocking the first time I sent it out, and data steward managers didn't even know that their employees were data stewards. So, you know, it's just chipping away, it's educating, it's communicating, and it's just continuously doing it.
Akhilesh, anything you want to add to that? Any other best practices you see from additional customers?
Yeah, sure. And just to add to that, leading towards best practices should be the goal. Apex can partner with any company to accomplish that, right? So without those best practices, what happens is you're just reinventing or automating the existing processes, which may not be efficient. So any automation or any technology solution that is applied to processes which are not efficient won't work for you, right? So always think about how can I improve the process before changing it.
I love it. And a question specifically about Apex Analytics. Are the business rules in Apex Analytics specific to vendor and supplier domain, or process, or generic enough to be used in any domain or process?
Excellent question. So out of box, it can be used with any type of supplier or any domain that you have, right? So we have generic enough rules to incorporate it, but we also have rules specific to, say, independent contractors, for example, or we have rules where if it is a government vendor versus a individual vendor, then the system may behave differently. So yes, you actually get both type of rules out of box, generic rules, as well as domain or process specific rules.
Perfect. So back to you, Karen, too. So when you considered buy versus build, did you only consider supplier master data, or do you also consider other SSMP master data like commodity, GL code?
So I can see the question. And the question is TIBCO versus Apex. We do have TIBCO, and we are using the TIBCO to some degree. We just didn't want to custom build a portal on top of it because of the time it took and the resources we had and all of the other things that I discussed in the presentation. But we are using it for reference management, and we have a taxonomy in there and some other things. So, but I would say, to answer the question specifically, I would say we really were just considering it for supplier master.
Perfect. And which MDM implementation, I think I'm going to slip this last one in here in the last minute we have, which MDM implementation style you have used at Lennox, and could you share the reason behind that?
So I'm not sure exactly that I understand the question. So yeah, I'm not really sure I understand what you mean by MDM implementation style. And I don't know if that person is on to clarify it.
Yeah, maybe they can send a little chat in the chat section if you got a little time to hang out.
Yeah, I can say that for customer contact, we used TIBCO. Maybe this will help. I don't know. We used TIBCO EBX to do the deduplication, try to match up, get a golden record type thing with customer, because we were doing things outside of SAP, and we had a couple other sources of customers. So we were trying to merge all of the data together and find out, what is the golden record, what is the master record. For vendor, it was a little bit different. We are deduping more than we are trying to merge the records together. So I hope that helped. I don't know.
I believe so. It was great. Thank you so much. And they did ask, they did add a little registration style, consolidation style, coexistence style, transactional, centralized style.
Yeah, I'll follow up with them outside of this.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to both of you for this great presentation, and thank you to Apex Analytics. But I'm afraid that is all the time we have slotted for this session.